Hi, how's it going? Welcome back to the channel, and I am here for a list video for you guys. This is a top 3 list video. So this is a video idea that I put a little bit of time thinking about because, well, I've stated before that I think that this year, 2019, is hands down the best year for music of this decade. And you know, as I've thought about it, I thought that, you know what? What were the worst years for music of the 2010s? So that's what we'll be talking about for this video. So I'll be naming what I think are the top 3 worst years for music of this decade. So I think we're going to begin by chronology order. So yeah, let's go ahead and begin. And we're going to begin with the year 2011. Now, I think a lot of people can agree that 2011 was a pretty weak year for music. I think either because of the amount of albums that year had to offer, or it had some great bands come out with some pretty weak material that year. You of course had that Metallica collaboration album with Lou Reed, Lulu album, and it was hands down the worst thing Metallica has ever done. And you also had some other pretty just average albums too, like Leveler by August Burns Red, which wasn't a bad album, but probably their weakest album. And you also had In Waves by Trivium, which again, not a bad album, but one of Trivium's weakest albums. Now, don't get it twisted, I still do think 2011 had its moments. You of course had Until We Have Faces by Red, and Understanding What We've Grown to Be by We Came as Romans. Now, I know We Came as Romans is a band that I'm sure a lot of you could care less about, but you know what? They're a band that does have a soft spot for me. They were one of my first metalcore bands, so, there's that. So, yeah, obviously not a band that I'm crazy about like I used to be, but I still do have a soft spot for them, of course. So, and my favorite album by them happened to be a 2011 release, so I mean, there's that, I guess. So yeah, 2011, I think a lot of people can agree, was one of the worst years for music. So let's go ahead and move on to the next year, and for this next year, I think a lot of people can agree with, and that would be 2014. Now, I think 2014's biggest flaw is the just the lack of albums that it just had to offer in general. Like, I think that's its biggest flaw. It's not a year where a lot of bands released weak material, but it's just very, very little material. Like, I feel like out of all the years of this decade, actually 2014 had the least to offer. I mean, honestly, there's only 3 albums that I can think of that would like make a top best albums of 2014 list, and obviously that's a list that I never made, which is kind of ironic considering I did start this YouTube channel in 2014, but I didn't do that list. But obviously if I did, it'd be a very small list. So yeah, I mean, of course you had some albums to come out that year that were still really good, of course. Such as The Grey Chapter by Slipknot, Extremist by Demon Hunter, and The Hunting Party by Linkin Park. So, yeah, there's been some good stuff to come out in 2014, but all in all, it just had very little to offer. That's what I think. So let's go ahead and move on to the third and final year for this list, which is the most recent one, of course, and that would be 2017. Now, once again, 2017, I think a lot of people can agree, was a pretty disappointing year for music. It did have its moments, of course. It's a very hit or miss year for music. I think it had some really great albums, but it also had some albums that were just not good or just kind of average. You, of course, had One More Light by Linkin Park, which sadly ended up being the last album with Chester, and maybe possibly the last album of Linkin Park's career. And yeah, I know a lot of people, saw that album, coming as a disappointment, of course, because of the singles. It was just a very poppy album, very mainstream, commercial sounding record, and yeah, Linkin Park's worst album for sure. You also had Outlive by Demon Hunter, which was not a bad album per se, but it did end up being one of Demon Hunter's weakest albums. I know a lot of people really just don't like that album at all. I think it's honestly an overhated album. I think there's a lot of people that make it sound worse than it actually is. But yeah, again, I think it's one of Demon Hunter's weakest, but not a bad album. And you, of course, had what's it called? Cold Like War by We Came as Romans, which was one of We Came as Romans' weakest albums, but it was good for a couple of songs. But all in all, it was just very average. Oh, and you also had Madness by All That Remains. Oh, I forgot all about that record. Probably All That Remains' his weakest album. I forgot that was even a thing. Again, that album is also good for a couple of songs, but very weak material from the band. And then there was Gone by Red, which I think was an okay album, but definitely towards the bottom for me when it comes to Red's discography. So yeah, there's been a lot of either just okay albums or albums that were just disappointments, I think 2017 actually has two flaws, of course, besides, a lot of great bands' weak material coming out that year. But the second flaw is the lack of metal albums. There just was lacking metal albums that year. It was a great year for modern rock. You had bands like Red, Starset, Nothing More, and Seether come out with albums that year. But as for metal, didn't have much to offer. But of course, you did have The Sin and the Sentence by Trivium, which was probably the best album of that year. And you also had Phantom Anthem by August Burns Red, that was a great album. And then, of course, there was Outlive by Demon Hunter. But yeah. 2017, very hit or miss year for music. But all in all, I'd say it's one of the worst years for music of this decade. So there you have it, guys. That is, in my opinion, the top 3 weakest years for music. Let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day, and take care.